This lecture is our orientation to organic chemistry and organic compounds. This is a brief introduction. You'll get all of these compounds in more detail in future lectures. So, organic compounds are carbon containing. This means I can get very complicated molecules because carbon can form 4 covalent bonds. So I have carbon, an oxygen, a pair of hydrogens, another carbon, an oxygen, and this is actually a double bonded oxygen. Don't ask me what this molecule is, but it's a pretty molecule. It has lots of different functional groups on it, and it can get bigger and bigger. So I can get extremely complicated things. This is starch right here. It has a lot of glucose subunits repeated over and over and over again. This is DNA. We're going to look at DNA in lecture on the second week. It's very complicated. This is a protein, I believe it's hemoglobin, and it has all these protein subunits in it. So organic compounds are really complex, and they're the main structural and functional units of our body. Now, remember water. We have a water molecule, an oxygen, a hydrogen, another hydrogen, and the oxygen sort of hogs the electrons. So the electrons are spending all their time here, and they go hi, and spend more time here, and say hi, and more time here. So we have a partial negative charge there, and a partial positive charge. In the inorganic chemistry video, I talked about how water, with its partial charges, can break up salts. Now, if we look at carbohydrates, we have all these OH bonds. There's an OH bond, there's an OH bond, there's an OH bond. So these are polar bonds as well. So polar bonds here, polar bonds here. Because they're similar molecules, they're both polar molecules, carbohydrates dissolve in water. So you get your coffee in the morning, you pour 5 cups of sugar in, the sugar will dissolve up to a certain point. Now, they're made of repeated units. So monosaccharide is 1 unit. So this is glucose, it is 1 sugar unit. We have sucrose, there's 2. We have a glucose plus a fructose. Starch and glycogen, which is basically starch for your muscles, and cellulose, which is plant fiber, all are multiple chains. So monosaccharides are 1 unit, disaccharides 2, polysaccharides are many. We will come back and visit that in the nutrition chapter. So we're not worried about this right now. We care different types of carbohydrates, different number of units, but they're all water soluble up to a certain point. Now, carbohydrates are the only safe energy source for your brain. There's something called a ketone body, which is another energy source, but they're acidic. If you remember in the inorganic chemistry video I mentioned, if your body gets too acidic, you get very lethargic. And I talked about somebody that was on the ketone diet. So, it's the primary energy source of muscle, the liver, the heart, the brain, and the kidney. Those organs get all the glucose. And it stores energy as glycogen in our bodies, in starch in plants, and these are chains of glucose. The glycogen is a multi-branched one, breaks down super fast. Starch is a very straight linear one that breaks down super slowly. And cellulose is fiber in plants. So those are the functions. Energy storage, primary energy source, and then we have fiber. And again, we'll talk more about fiber in nutrition. Lipids are hydrocarbons. They are big, long chains of carbon. This is a little blurry. If you see here, carbon and hydrogen, carbon and hydrogen, carbon and hydrogen, carbon and hydrogen. This is not polar. This is a normal, non-polar covalent bond. This part is actually polar. It has our hydroxide group in it. But here we have a long chain, and if you recall, oils, which is a technically part of a lipid, do not dissolve in water. They float on top of the water. Fat does not dissolve in water. Fat does not dissolve in water. It is hydrophobic, water-fearing. And this actually makes a great membrane. When we talk about the cell membrane, we'll talk about the lipids being insoluble and preventing water from crossing through, and anything water-soluble. That means glucose, that means ions, and actually it means proteins as well. There are 3 types: fatty acids, cholesterol, and phospholipids. Number 1, they form the cell membrane because lipids do not let water-soluble things cross, so it's a very good way to keep the inside of the cell in, the outside of the cell out. It's actually a very effective energy storage molecule. That's why when you overeat, it stores the energy as fat and not as glycogen. Energy source. Remember I said glucose is used in the brain, liver, kidney, skeletal muscles. There's no glucose left over. Oh, and the brain. There's no glucose left over for anything else. So epithelial tissue, that's like your skin or the inside of your mouth. Connective tissue, those are ligaments and tendons. Those all rely on lipids for energy. And insulation. You have it around your internal organs. You have it under your skin. It's all for insulation. Now, proteins and amino acids. We have a whole lecture on these. Then we talk about their functions in the nutrition chapter. Proteins are made from these things called amino acids. So we have an amino acid right here. Oh, look! A hydroxide group. That means it is water-soluble. Oh, a hydroxide group. That means it is water-soluble. And actually, this whole acid group is polar. So proteins are water-soluble. And this group right here, that's another polar group. The electrons like being around the nitrogen. So we have a partial positive here. We have a partial negative here. So you have 2 ends that are water-loving. So most amino acids, actually half the amino acids, are freely water-soluble. Then the other half are special, but they have water-soluble parts. So for the test, amino acids are water-soluble. They have a carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur. So they have all the fun stuff. And they're identical except for this functional group. So they all have this polar amino group. They all have this polar organic acid group. They differ. This one's a hydrogen. This one is a methane group. We have this functional group here. Protein function. They are construction material. Collagen fibers in your skin are proteins. Elastic fibers in your ear are proteins. Actin and myosin, which moves your muscles, are proteins. They act as something called enzymes. These are things that speed chemical reactions. Most of your hormones are actually protein-based. And then antibodies are all proteins as well. This table just gives you what proteins can do. Please do not memorize this table. We'll talk about a lot of this later. They do regulation, enzymes, and neurotransmitters. Hemoglobin's a protein it transports. Antibodies are proteins. They protect you from things. Actin and myosin are proteins. They're muscle contraction. So these are the roles of proteins. Lastly, we have nucleic acids. They're complex molecules made up of a sugar, that means it's polar, a nitrogen-containing base, and 1 or more phosphate molecules. So the function of DNA, or nucleic acids, are to store and transfer genetic film. That's DNA and RNA. It's a source of cellular energy. So your mitochondria make ATP, which is actually a nucleic acid. And we'll talk about a lot about this NADH also. That is a nucleic acid. And intercellular messengers, we will not be talking about them, but I like saying cyclic AMP and cyclic GMP. So those are actually nucleic acids. So nucleic acids play an important role. And technically, 2 B vitamins, riboflavin and niacin, are the base of a nucleic acid. So that is our very brief intro to organic chemistry. Again, there's only a few questions. It's what is this function? Is it water soluble or not water soluble? We have further chapters where we talk about all of these. Thank you.